Hi, this is Sammie Smiles, and I'm your host, Sammie Vance. This podcast is sure to leave you inspired and with a smile. Now let's get right into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 6th episode of Sammie Smiles. I'm your host, Sammie Vance, and I'm just really excited for today's episode. I'm going to first of all say thank you to Buddy Fruits for helping us set up this podcast. And I'm really happy to have Rebecca Louie as my guest today. She's the executive director for the BEEEE Conservancy, and that is a nonprofit organization established in 2009 in response to the bee crisis, which is really cool because I've learned a little bit about that. And I'm excited to talk about bees and why they're so important to our world and just all sorts of things about them. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today.
I am so excited to talk about bees with you, Sammie.
Yeah, thank you. So I've known that bees are important for a while, but I haven't really known, I guess, in depth the importance of them. So I remember a few years back actually going to a climate camp, and we learned all about bees. And when preparing for this video, I just all those came back, and I remember we got to look at bees, and I also remember in 3rd grade we got to dissect a bee. That was interesting. Yeah. So I learned about pollen and all that, and how really a lot of things can grow without bees, and they play such a huge role in our life that we don't know. But yeah, it's just so crazy. So what are some of the main foods that would be gone if we didn't have bees?
Well, if we even take a step back, it's kind of crazy to think that 1 in 3 bites of every food that we eat is pollinated by a bee. So that's a third of everything on the planet on your dinner table, at your Thanksgiving table. And so foods like almonds, apples, super dependent on bees to pollinate them. But beyond even the things that we eat, 80% of the entire world's pollinating flowered plants are pollinated by bees. So if you think about any plant anywhere and its role in sort of the ecosystem, right? Like what feeds on it, where may it grow? 80% of them depend on bees, and there's 20,000 species of bees worldwide. So they're super important for both our food systems and for our general environment.
That's crazy and not something that I feel like people would know. So I think just knowing that it's different, I guess it gives you a different outlook kind of on the foods that you eat, and you're like, whoa, it's just it's so crazy to think about. And yes, thanks for sharing. And like you said, I read there's 20,000 different bee species in the world, and I read that not too long ago, and I'm like, what? I could not process it. It's just so crazy. Yeah, and 70% of bees live underground. Who would have known that? I didn't know that.
I know. So I'm from New York City. I was born and raised here, and it's basically to me the equivalent of the subway system. All of these bees underground, living in their little tunnels, laying their eggs, fostering their cocoons, saving their food. And it's really worth noting too, we all think about honeybees when we think of bees, right? Mm-hmm. And honeybees live in a colony, and a colony can be up to 50,000 bees at the height of the season, which is a lot of bees. But for the most part, the rest of the world's bees live solitary lifestyles. So one bee, one tunnel underground, one bee, one cavity or hole in a log. And, understanding that is kind of fun, because then you think about the social bees, which are the honeybees, and then all these kind of cool loners that are just kind of contemplating their souls in their little tunnels underground, or in a hole in a tree. And it's very different how they live, even though they all do the same process of pollinating the plants.
Yeah, that's crazy. And like you said, the first thing that I think of when I think of bees is honeybees. And there's, I think I also read one time that only makes up 7% of the 20, or 7, not 7%, 7 species of the 20,000 species. But there's so many different types. So what are some of the different types of bees that you think might surprise everyone?
Well, we know bumblebees. They're sort of the next famous bee after the honeybee. You know, they're all cuddly and furry, and they are underground dwellers, and they are semi-social. So they'll live maybe in colonies of like 50 to a couple hundred. But there are bees like the fairy bee, which is the smallest bee in the world. It's less than 2 millimeters, which is like, you know, I don't even know if I can like hold my fingers, you know, that far apart. And they live largely like in the deserts, like in Arizona, the Sonoran Desert. And it's funny because when people try to look for them, they're so small that you don't even really see the bee, you see its shadow moving across the sand because it's a little hard to see. So that's fascinating to me. But then there are other like common species that are across North America, which is home to 4,000 species. So you think of like the leafcutter bee, which lives in a cavity, basically like a hole, and kind of like those leafcutter ants. They build rooms for their babies in their dwellings by like cutting leaves and creating little walls. Mason bees are another really popular and common species, and kind of like a mason, a human mason, they use mud and soil to like, again, create walls and like spaces as they're shaping their home for their young. So that's just, you know, what was that, 3, 4 that I mentioned? And a lot of them have subspecies and like vary depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, there's a lot of bees out there. We could spend the next few years talking about them all.
That's crazy. Yeah, now I really want to look up fairy bees because that sounds really interesting to me. I'm gonna look that up after this.
Yay.
But yeah, it's really cool how there's so many, and it's like most people wouldn't even think about it. So it was really cool for me to like look at all the different kinds. Or not all of them, but some of them. Because there's so many. Yeah. And also it's Women's History Month this month. So I was really excited. And I thought it was really neat when I learned that 90% of a honeybee hive is female. And
Yes.
yeah, they do all the jobs that worker bees do. And so before I just thought it was like the queen bee that was female and like they had that power, but I didn't know that 90% of like it was female. So that's just really cool for me to learn when I learned that. And yeah, so what are some jobs that worker bees do? And can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the women and
For sure.
bees? Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite kind of stories to tell because people don't realize, you know, they kind of like, you know, the queen bee and they're like, oh, okay, female. That makes sense because she lays eggs and she lays like up to 2,000 eggs a day during the laying season, which is a lot of eggs. But as she's building up that population, you know, who's taking care of the hive? So when you ask like, what kinds of jobs do they do? Basically everything, because it's a society, right, in there with, again, like up to 50,000 bees. Those workers are nurses to the eggs and the larvae. They're the foragers who go out to fly and find pollen and nectar. They're literally secreting wax out of their bodies and building that beautiful honeycomb. And if someone tries to invade, whether it's something like maybe trying to get at the honey or, you know, sometimes creatures like in the cooler weather like to go into a hive for warmth because the bees stay actually very warm together in a cluster. They're guard bees who will like attack and protect the hive from all these types of invaders. The queen herself has a group of attendants who just like kind of follow her around. They make sure she's fed and she gets to where she needs to be and they keep her clean. So basically any job that you can kind of imagine in the real world that keeps society going, like housekeeper bees, there's undertaker bees that like drag out dead bees because, you know, they don't want to, they keep the space very clean and they don't want the dead bodies just lying around. Basically any job in the human world that you can imagine to keep a society running more or less kind of exists in a beehive, and it's all the females. And then that leads people to ask, well, so what are the boys, the drones? And they do have a job. So I should say there's one job that the other workers can't do. And what the drones do is provide genetic material for the queen. So, you know, as I mentioned, she's laying 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day. At some point, she has to meet some lovely gentleman bees and make some magic with them. And she only takes one flight out of the nest ever to meet these young gentlemen. And then she comes back ready to lay for up to 5 years.
Wow. No, I think that's crazy. Yeah.
And actually, one more crazy fact, which is kind of interesting, and I feel as though it shocks people. So, because the drone bees have this one job, when the winter comes, now we're heading into spring, but right now there are no drones in the hive. And the reason why is when the weather starts getting colder, all of the workers are like, oh, hey, Dave and John and all you lovely drones. It was really fun hanging out with you and getting all your food and cleaning up after you and taking care of you when you were a baby and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you didn't save any of this honey for us. And so it was really fun, but you are no longer in the colony. And then they drag all of the drones out for the winter. And then they kind of like, and those guard bees are definitely like, they're like, no, you're not coming back in. That's it. And then, the drones did get to live rent-free, food-free, kind of on like a lovely meal plan. So this is how the society works.
Wow, no, I love how I love how it relates to human world, like the human world. I think that's so crazy, and like how it's so close. And that last fact, that's so interesting. I love that. But yeah, it's just like I didn't even know that they had all those jobs to do. It's so cool. And learning about all these bees and the bee facts, it makes me realize how important bees are, like I mentioned at the beginning. And I think that I will definitely look with the new appreciation towards bees. And I like in or above or underground, I'll just think of them in a new light because, sometimes they can be annoying, but they help us so much. And I think that's really cool. And I think it's important for people to realize that. So can you tell us why they are in danger and what we can do about it?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked that question. So the why, it's pretty straightforward. One, they're losing their habitat, right? Like, so on the one hand, there's things like development, which makes sense. We're taking down natural spaces, we're putting up buildings and things like that. But they're also losing their food source because where there are green spaces, people aren't really planting for bees. So if you think about like ornamental stuff, like, oh, I live in X state, but I'm going to pick this like beautiful plant from, somewhere in South America that just doesn't belong here. And I'm going to grow it in my garden because it's pretty or it's, it's functionally cool. What you're actually doing when you're making that choice is taking away an opportunity for a native bee to feed on the food that it's evolved to feed off of. And so you might hear a lot about people talking about, plant native plants. That's what it means. Like there's a reason that things have like grown in specific regions and they flourish there. And there's a whole ecosystem that depends on them. So that's one reason why some bees are struggling because there's not enough food. Then there's this fact of chemical pesticides, not great. They're affecting all of our insect species right now. And, insects are very important to the food chain. They serve a lot of pollinator services. And so when we start thinking about the loss of insects, on the one hand, you might be like, oh, okay, cool. I'm not getting as many bites in the summertime or what have you. But the bigger implications are really scary because so many elements in the environment depend on them. So, when you ask what we can do, like instead of pesticides, there's a lot of other strategies you can have to garden care that are a lot more holistic, that are organic practices that have to do with maybe, treating your soil a different way and like bringing plant health with other strategies. And so vowing to step away from chemical pesticides is a big deal. We did talk about those underground bees. And I will say another fun tip is just don't mulch. People love mulch in their gardens. They want to block those weeds. I get it. But when you do that, you're basically putting a carpet over someone's house that they can't get in and out of, right? Mulch is like a thick cover. So not mulching is a great way to save space for them. Things like climate change are impacting bees. As temperatures change, plants are doing weirdo things, or there's very dramatic weather that's also impacting their food sources in their homes. So, that's posing a real danger to bees. Like if the apple crop hits a weird frost and all the blossoms fall off, all those bees that were ready to chow down on apple blossoms have nothing. Similarly, if you're flooding areas, that ground is going to be so saturated and ruined. And it's very complex. Everything on this planet is so interdependent. But yeah, there are plenty of small things that we can do that make a big difference for bees. I mentioned a couple of gardening practices. There's, of course, just educating oneself and learning about all the amazing ways that bees touch us and touch our day-to-day lives, and hopefully taking that into action. So whether that's educating more people on the things that they can do, hosting a fundraiser or supporting a local beekeeper or bee club, bringing bee habitats to your schools or community spaces, planting things. And again, those native species is so important. So those are all pretty simple things I like to think that people can do because they're probably doing them anyway. And it's just about making a slightly different decision when you're doing the act that will really, really foster the health and longevities of local bees.
Yeah, I love that. And I challenge everyone to take action to help save the bees because I don't know where we'd be without them. But yeah, thanks for sharing all that. And I also have recently teamed up with Buddy Fruits to spread awareness of being kind and being a buddy, something that I am personally very passionate about. And I know that you have teamed up with Buddy Fruits as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that collaboration and what you guys are doing?
Sure thing. So Buddy Fruits reached out to us because they're, of course, committed to sustainability, but also are very invested in education and young people in general and how they interact. And so for me, or for the Bee Conservancy, I should say, we talked a lot about different ways that we can collaborate. And we are so excited to launch a comic book later this spring that is, a story featuring 4 different bee species. There's a blue orchard mason bee, and there is one of those fairy bees in there, a honeybee, a bumblebee, and a wasp. And, there's stories kind of friendship and bullying, or is it bullying? Maybe people are just misunderstood, collaboration, learning from each other, communication, all in the context with a lot of fun bee facts. So you get to learn about different species, how they live, but also hopefully take away a story of what we can really do together to kind of overcome our differences and really learn to be better buddies for each other.
I love that. And I'm so excited to read it and see it. So yeah. And before we get onto rapid fire round, is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I think we covered a ton. And I'm just so grateful that you're giving bees a little bit of a platform for your audience. And I really hope and I'm excited to hear how you and your listeners get out there and make the world more bee friendly.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So how can we, before we get onto the rapid fire round, actually, how can we find more about the Bee Conservancy?
Oh, thanks for asking. You can find us at thebeeconservancy.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. Our handles are all slightly different on each of them, so you'll have to look it up. But we're really excited to have people join our online communities because it's a great place to talk. And also on our website, there are different items that you can download that are activities, worksheets, and also if you want to reach out to us, we have a contact form there as well. So we look forward to hearing from anyone and everyone about all their bee questions.
Yeah, so make sure to follow them in their amazing journey. And now, if you're ready, then I'm ready for rapid fire.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Favorite color?
Turquoise.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Favorite food?
I'm sorry, what?
Favorite food?
Oh, tacos.
Favorite quote?
Wow, that one's really hard. It's a very long Barack Obama quote that I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe I could send it to you later.
Yeah. Favorite animal?
Dogs.
Most interesting bee fact, you think?
The queen again, when she emerges from her cell, she actually goes to the other cells. There's several queens, that are kind of gestating in real time, and kills them to make sure that, she got out first. And this is her jam.
Wow, I did
Like
not
an
know that.
episode. Yeah, it's like a television show. It's very dramatic.
Oh, wow, I'd love to watch that sometime. Would you rather speak all languages or be able to speak to animals?
Ah, but would knowing all languages include the languages of all animals?
Would they? Would it?
Ooh.
That's a good, yeah.
In which case that.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's been one other person who said that on my podcast, and I'm like, good thinking. So yeah, if you could have lunch with anyone in the world, dead or alive, who would it be?
I would love to have lunch with Michelle Obama.
That would be so cool. Yeah. Do you prefer hot or cold?
In terms of food or weather?
In general, just in general, I guess. Yeah.
I guess cold. That's interesting. Yeah, cold.
Yeah. So for the last question, that's all my guess. What is something that makes you smile?
Something that I love is watching people discover things together and find joy together, because there's a special magic that happens like when people experience delight in the direction of like change and making things and collaborating. So that will across the board always make me smile. I'll watch any video or meme about people like just doing great things together.
I love that. Same. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on my podcast. Really, this is such an amazing conversation. I loved it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to Buddy Fruits as well for helping us get this podcast. And I hope that everyone remembers to be kind and have a beautiful day. Great puns, I know.
Nailed it. Perfect.
Yeah, and remember that you don't just have to be an adult to make a difference. You could be a kid too. I hope you have a great day. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.